Keep going, get around, get around.
This House Education on Tuesday, April 15th. Welcome back from the weekend, everybody.
Fine.
We are rolling along here. So today's idea, we will probably continue this theme over the next couple of weeks or so, is to get us kind of based in current law, while at the same time thinking about what it is we need to do if we go to larger districts, and these districts have all new sort of governance and powers and charters and all these things. So today we're starting off with essentially, what are the powers of school boards currently? Tomorrow we'll have legislative council in again to sort of talk about, okay, here are the sort of issues that you all should be thinking about going forward. We'll try to get ourselves as well primed as possible so that we aren't having to, start fresh next year. Anyway, we'll turn it right over to legislative council to present to us on powers of school boards. Welcome. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Hello, Beth Hanson, Office of Legislative Counsel. So I thought what we would do today is we would just look at some different provisions of current law on your website. And I think what we're going to look at is powers of school districts. And when we talk about powers of school districts, we also need to talk about powers of the electorate. Those are two separate statutes right now. Powers of supervisory union boards. And then I did not send Annie a link to these two, but you should be aware that they exist. There are actually duties for superintendents and duties for principals in law. All ripe for you all to make policy decisions on. That policy decision could be keep it the same. That policy decision could be change one thing. That policy decision could be change anything. So my job is not to push you in any of those directions. It's just to make you aware of what's in law. So, what do you want to look at first?
Why don't we not do SU boards first?
Okay, so school districts. So if you'll remember, this chapter 9 is our general school districts chapter. And this is where you're going to see some kind of outdated language around incorporated school districts. These are all of your school districts. Incorporated school districts under current law are school districts that were chartered originally, and there are still some of those that operate now. They're single town. Town school districts. But then you get down here and there's other provisions. And all of these in subchapter 4, all of these laws also apply to union school districts unless the union school district law says otherwise. So when we're talking about powers of school boards, it's in chapter 9, but it also applies to union school districts. Again, unless the union school district law says otherwise. And for today's conversation, I think it's safe to assume that everything we're about to talk about applies to all kinds of school districts. So, Section 563 is the powers of the school board. And this is a pretty big statute. And so the first thing I'll point out is that school boards, and again, remember this is all current law, and you all get to decide whether you want to keep it this way. But currently, school boards determine the educational policies of the school district. So anywhere in state law that it says a school board or a school district shall come up with a policy for X, Y, and Z, here's the overall language that says it's the school board's responsibility for developing that policy. And so it's any policy you can think of, right? Your behavioral threat assessment team policies, your hazing, harassment, and bullying prevention policies, attendance policies, anything. Not all of the policies that school boards enact or adopt are specifically required in state law. One of them that is gonna vary from district to district are, like attendance patterns for their schools. So every school district handles that differently. As far as how do you determine, you have 5 elementary schools, who goes to which elementary school, right? There's no specific law that says a school district shall adopt a policy that determines which students attend which elementary school. But if you've got a school district, multiple elementary schools, that's kind of a common sense issue that school districts are gonna have to sort through. And a lot of the way they do that is through the development of policies under this section. So very broad, develop all the policies. It also, here, a school board may also approve or disapprove rules and regulations proposed by the principal or superintendent for the conduct and management of public schools in the district. So the principal and superintendent have their own set of duties under state law. So for example, school boards adopt policies. Superintendents would be charged with developing the procedures that are tied to the policy. And that's in the superintendent statute. This is one of my favorite sentences in all of Title 16. May take any action that is required for the sound administration of the school district. It doesn't get much broader than that. You'll see here, there's baked in, well, what happens if someone's wondering if what the school board is doing is actually required? So the secretary, with the advice of the attorney general, upon application of the school board, shall decide whether any action contemplated or taken by a school board under the subdivision is actually required for the sound administration, and the secretary's decision is final. So there is kind of a review process built in there. I do not know how often or if this has ever been implemented. That would be a question field. Possession, care, control, and management of the property of the school district subject to the authority vested in the electorate or any school district official. So that's where you get into the variances of your articles of agreement or your charters. Got to keep everything in good repair. And then here you see the prohibition on firearms. The school board shall regulate or prohibit firearms or other dangerous or deadly weapons on school premises. Shall have discretion to furnish instruction to students who have completed a secondary education and to administer early education programs. So adult ed and pre-K. May relocate or discontinue use of a schoolhouse or facility subject to the provisions of sections 821 and 822 of this title. 821 and 822 are the sections, the first two sections in chapter 21, which is our public tuition statute. It's actually, or chapter, it's actually called the maintenance of public schools. And that's, those sections both say, unless the school district decides otherwise, you have to maintain a public school. And that's where the tuition gets in. Got to come up with some business processes here. So a system for receipt, deposit, disbursement, accounting, control, and reporting procedures that meets criteria established by the state board rules. I'm not going to get any more detailed than that. This is going to vary from district to district, what this looks like. And that's important. I would suggest that that's important for you all to think about when you're talking about the merging of school districts.
That's number 8.
Yes, 8. Shall establish, I'm on 9 now, shall establish with the advice and consent of the auditor of accounts and the secretary a system of accounts for the proper control and reporting of school district finances and for stating the annual financial condition of the school district. Again, I'm thinking that this varies from district to district, exactly what this looks like. Subsection Subdivision 10 and 11 are definitely gonna need some work. In fact, I believe subdivision 11 is amended in H 454 in the finance sections around supplemental school district spending. But here's where we get to the budget piece. So school boards have to annually distribute to the electorate not less than 10 days prior to the district's annual meeting. There's a report on the conditions and needs of the school district, including reports from superintendent, the treasurer, and the treasurer's annual report, the school district's treasurer. Let's see. And then there's language in here about how they can make that report available. And then 11 is the budget. So every year they have to propose a budget. And then they have to provide notice of that budget to everyone on a certain timeline. And a lot of that timeline is tied to election law for warnings. And then subdivision 10 subdivision 11 specifies what needs to be in the budget. And then you have your warning, your ballot language here. So again, this is definitely something you're going to want to think about for future state. Shall employ such persons, I'm on 12 now, as may be required to carry out the work of the school district. Let's see what 242 is. I don't know that off the top of my head. Yes, subject to what the superintendent is required to do. Shall provide at the expense of the district, subject to the approval of the superintendent, all textbooks, learning materials, equipment, and supplies. Shall exercise the general powers given to a legislative branch of the municipality. May execute contracts on behalf of the school district, including contracts providing for binding arbitration by its chair or any person designated whose appointment is recorded in the minutes of the board. Shall allow any high school student who meets the academic requirements to graduate and receive a diploma in less than 4 years. Shall establish policies and procedures designed to avoid the appearance of board member conflict of interest. Shall have the authority to engage in short-term borrowing. May apply for grants and may accept and expend grants or gifts. Anytime someone asks me about fundraising, this is one of the sections I point them to.
Oh.
The board shall include in its annual report any of those things that it got, right? 23, may at the expense of the district present informational materials to the electorate on any matter to be voted. However, such materials shall be limited to those that are reasonably designed to inform, educate, and explain the board's position. Adopt a policy to integrate home study students into its schools through enrollment in courses, participation in co-curricular and extracurricular activities, and use of facilities. And if it maintains a secondary school, upon request, award a high school diploma to any Vermont resident who served in the military in World War II, Korean War, or during the Vietnam era, was honorably separated from active federal military service, and does not hold a high school diploma. Annually inform each secondary student and their parents of the right to opt out of the federal requirement that student contact information be provided to military recruiters or institutions of higher ed. Annually inform students and their parents or guardians of their options for school choice under applicable laws or policy. And then they have to assign annually an employee, designate an employee to inform parents of students with life-threatening allergies and life-threatening chronic illnesses of applicable provisions of Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. To inform appropriate school staff of their responsibilities and provide necessary training to carry out these responsibilities. So, for example, kiddos with food allergies may qualify for accommodations under certain provisions of federal law, including Section 504. May make available school facilities and equipment for specified public purposes if such purposes appear in the judgment of the board to be in the best interest of the district and are an efficient, economical, and appropriate use of facilities and equipment. What is not here is that they still have to follow First Amendment. Because they are the government. Subject to the requirements of section 571 of this title, may enter into contracts with other school boards to provide joint programs, services, facilities, and professional or other staff. And may enter into a contract or contracts with school offering a distance learning program that is approved by one or more accrediting agencies recognized by the U.S. Department of Ed or is approved by the state board.
There's a lot of stuff after 32.
Well, that's all the times you amended it. You can see you just amended it last year, and this was the yield bill.
Mhm.
You updated the ballot language. Yep, right. You can see act, yeah, we won't go into all of it. But you can see act
Oh, all right, so
46
all of
is
that-
here, Act 49 is here.
All of that is not attached to distance learning.
To the last.
No, oh, no,
The
oh
whole
my
bill.
goodness, no, this appears at the bottom of every
Yeah.
statute. This is every time you've amended it.
State, you could have
Yes.
space in there, would be good, right?
Paragraph right.
So this is, school districts, but generally speaking, they're adopting all the policies. They're doing the budget. They're an employer. And they've got responsibility over the buildings. That's a lot.
As we think about a future state, is there anything that comes to mind that isn't in this that may fall under the new district school board?
Yes, and I think a lot of what I'm thinking of falls right now under the supervisory union board's powers,
Okay.
such as development of curriculum,
Oh, right.
special education, continuing professional development. I think one of the questions I would pose to you all is if you're happy with, if the general thought is, well, we're just gonna create bigger school districts, but leave the responsibilities the same, I would say, let's reflect on whether the law is specific enough or general enough in order to enable these new school boards that are operating on a different scale to be able to do their job efficiently and effectively. So for example, determine the educational policies of the school district. I've already pointed out that there are lots of places in Title 16 that require specific policies to be adopted, but there are also places where there is no policy to be specifically required under law, but school boards do that so that their school district runs efficiently and effectively. If you all are comfortable in that the scale at which you are moving to is not going to change that math or change the school board's ability to figure out where they need a policy and where they don't, then great. But if you feel as though you need to build in some more specificity or some more places where you are requiring specific policies, that would be one thing to think about, right? Transportation right now is, you have to have a transportation policy, but you don't have to provide transportation. If you didn't change the law, that would be the same for those larger school districts. If you want to require transportation to be provided, if certain criteria are met or just across the board, you're gonna have to change that law. So I'm thinking of this as, what is everything that a school board has to do? Like, looking at an example of all of the policies that are in place now, where are they in law? So you know, and where are they not in law? And do you need to put them in law now to make sure that nothing slips through the cracks? And it may be that you don't need to change anything. I don't know. This is all policy. And let's look over at the electorate, powers of the electorate, and you can see, again, you're operating on a much larger scale in your future state as you envisioned it passed in H 454 on Friday. So one of the things that stuck out to me is, so the electorate is basically conducting these meetings, right? They're electing their moderator and running their school board meetings,
Annual.
annual meeting. Not the school, not the board meeting, the annual meetings, thank you. What does annual meeting look like for these new school districts?
Hmm.
How is participation accomplished?
Does anybody on the committee know, like, I'm just thinking about, so what's our largest sort of district that might operate at a higher level just due to population for Burlington? Does Burlington have an annual meeting like those the rest of us sort of are accustomed to? Does CVSD have like the annual meeting that that many people show up for?
I think it's required.
Yeah.
You will know it's more like, does anybody have a different form?
Oh,
Are there any that you know of large school districts, or SUs, we'll use that term, that operate with a charter as opposed to just operating out of this? You mentioned that there are still some small.
I
independently
believe
chartered.
so. Let's see. I will look into it. I don't want to say anything.
I'm just curious, we can
Yep.
look at that as an example.
Yep.
What may be different.
They vote annual salaries for school board members. I have no idea what that looks like out in the field,
oh,
but it is there.
Oh, yeah.
And now if you're moving to larger, what is that? You keep hearing this term in the administration's proposal, semi-professional. Haven't heard that term in a while, so I'm sorry to reintroduce it. But this is law, so that could happen. 7 is interesting to me. May authorize the school board to enter into leases of real property for more than 3 years. That doesn't have to be subject to the electorate, right?
Right.
Well, this is all-
Not the
this is
exact,
all
it's all
really fascinating.
policy.
Actually, as we think about doing things on a bigger scale.
Yep.
This is pretty old stuff.
it is.
And it was leasing property when it's in the same town or the next town over, the decision to spend that money is gonna potentially look a lot different if it's 20 towns that have never seen the building, think it's too much money, et cetera. Let's see.
Yeah, if we are on a foundation formula, you don't necessarily need to authorize
Right, voting on,
dollars because there won't be tax
Mhm.
revenue.
but here's your bonding.
Right.
What does bonding look like in your new school districts? And is there anything that's not here that you do want the electorate to have a say in your larger school districts, right? It goes both ways.
I think it'd be more like the form. I mean, the annual meeting goes back to the old days of small towns and small schools. They've almost become difficult just within our larger unified union school districts. It probably should have been modernized.
This one is also very interesting. They authorize the payment of actual and necessary expenses for school members when traveling in the performance of duty. If you're holding school board meetings all over a new district,
Right.
what does that look like for travel and reimbursement?
Because, right, I'm just gonna say, currently, school board members can put in for travel to school board meetings, but some do, some don't. It's
So
all,
they can if they're authorized. I don't think our
they don't.
district ever had any provision for mileage.
we've had
Your Stockton
occasional
is supposed to
members
cover it.
who will ask for mileage and others mostly don't. So it's just really random all over the place, which always drove me crazy. We either do it or we don't.
And I would imagine that what your school board is currently getting for that mileage reimbursement may be significantly less than they would be getting under in the future state.
Yeah.
And how is that factored into your foundation formula? And do your school board and your electorate, are they educated enough on these, like if you're leaving these decisions up to the electorate or even the school board to make these decisions? Is there an understanding of how that affects the trickle down, right? You get a certain flat amount and you've decided that you're gonna pay this much in expenses or this much in salary and what that does to the rest of your school district budget. It's not just another item on your budget and it's, you get it and you can allocate everything where you want to allocate it. If you're getting a flat amount and you're adding costs, that's gonna shake out somewhere.
It also matters the size of your board.
Yep. Oh, yes. We have not talked about that. That's a big one. I was gonna bring that up tomorrow morning.
The size of
Yeah.
your board, and it makes me think of the size of the legislature as well. They are.
Yes.
related.
Okay, so powers of the electorate, powers of the school board. They're here. I would say this is a nice guide. But sometimes starting from scratch and building up to make sure that you get everything is an interesting thought exercise rather than trying to just play with the statute that you have.
Sounds daunting.
Sounds like a thought exercise for ledge council. I don't
Yeah.
think
Know what our
it's
district
just.
is. We got, that's a lot of changing roots
We're
before we
limited.
do this.
Intellectual.
You were all brilliant and fully capable. Let's look quickly at SU responsibilities. So. Duties of supervisory union board, there's some big ones here.
But I just want to clarify that probably most districts at this point, the SD board also is one and the same. So they have both sets of powers and duties.
Yes. Do we need a refresher on the difference between union and district?
Suburban whiskey situation.
Yes.
Say that again.
Suburban whiskey situation.
Right.
I think some of the non-alcoholic
They both get
version
you
of
there.
that one. Okay.
Well, Labrador.
Now I understand.
Black lab.
Curriculum. Right now, that's a supervisory union board duty.
Mhm.
Let's see. Receiving and dispersing federal and state funds. Professional.
Need to worry about that.
Fed and state.
Oh, that's good.
That's very depressing.
Professional development,
Mhm.
special education services. Your business management or your business office, so employ a person or persons qualified to provide financial and student data management.
Thank you. So just, with that development of curriculum, this would be under the guidance of the superintendent and the school board.
Yeah,
It says duties of the board of each supervisory
it's
union.
the board. How this works in the field, I think is a question for the field. My understanding anecdotally is that often it will be staff, school staff, educators who come to the board and say,
Okay.
here's,
Absolutely.
You saw the red flag over here.
but it's up to the board to sign off on it.
There you go. Sounds good. Right.
or this is awful. And go back and keep coming back to us until we're happy.
Interesting.
Um,
That would be how it worked in my supervisory meeting.
human resources, so again, all the front office folks.
I just want to say, when it comes to curriculum, remember that it's also guided
State
by
board.
education policy standards.
Right.
Yes,
So it's not like you can, they're making.
yeah,
some
there's not a lot of,
goals.
yes, exactly.
Supervisory union boards are the ones that negotiate with teachers and administrators.
Right.
Manage construction projects. All your contracts for goods and services. Data management. Transportation, human resources management, joint agreements, if you're gonna do services between SUs or school districts. They've gotta come up with a report every year, including a figure showing the amount paid by each school district, so that you can allocate that to your member districts. They adopt their own budget for the SU. They adopt truancy policies. This is a big one that we don't ever talk about. But this is the thing. There are truancy actions filed in your courts currently. This virtual merger language is basically saying you can get together and come up with agreements to share services. Here's some non-compliance with tax, non-compliance. So if, let's see. If an SU or one of its member districts is failing to comply with any provision of subsection A of the section, subsection A is all of their duties. Then they notify, the secretary would notify the board and give them an opportunity for remediation. And if they don't remediate, then they could get a tax rate increase of 5%. I don't know that, I don't have any idea if this has ever been used. This is, again, while it sounds daunting, is an opportunity to do a lot of cleanup too. So if you are no longer going to have supervisory unions, then I would suggest a lot of the big stuff here needs to move to school districts, school boards. And if you are going to have some concept of supervisory unions, what is the school board responsibility and what is an SU responsibility is all policy.
It seems like the supervisory unions are better for those districts where the towns are gonna be really far apart in their representation. Like
That's my opinion.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
well, so with the supervisory union, you would have more local control the more school boards that you had. And so we're talking about, so if we could have 4,000 kids per district, then 4,000 kids in Chittenden County is gonna be a small district, and 4,000 kids in, I'll use my hometown, Glover, is gonna be in a much larger district. So your 5 school board members or your 7 school board members are gonna come from 30 miles in any direction versus Burlington, where they're gonna come from 6 blocks in any direction. I'm making these numbers up.
No.
Is that a fair understanding? So, okay, so that's why I'm saying it seems like a supervisory model within a rural district would preserve that local voice in a more important way than in an urban district. So my question, I guess, is it possible to have supervisory unions based on miles, geographic diameter of district size?
So I would just say at this point, original H 454 that the governor proposed and what we sent over does not envision SUs at all.
Right.
And mainly because it just didn't, we had testimony about that. And I guess as a counter to what you just said, you still have to have an SU board. So those, at least some of those people are still gonna have to travel a long distance to meet.
Right, but at least they would be representing people closer to home. I just.
Well, yeah, you know, they've got their pluses and minuses.
Yeah,
Another
right.
sort of minus is pretty hard to find a superintendent who's gonna wanna go every night to a school board meeting,
Right,
15 miles here, 30 miles there.
that has been the big hang up, there's not one big hang up, but that has been a big hang up in some of our more rural communities, is
Yeah.
not going with the SU model.
Yeah.
And like this, we're moving forward, I get that, and I'm just wondering what we can do in moving forward that will make people more on board.
So I would say that there are ways in a school district to address the issues that you're bringing up without having a supervisory union. What a supervisory union means is that you've got isolated, separate boards that feed into a supervisory union. And as much as I totally understand about representation on that, I'm wondering about ways that you could create that same representation with less, I know we can, there's ways to do this, with less disparate perspectives of things. You'd still have the voice, but it would be people coming together, joining, as opposed to saying, this is the way we do it. That's the concern I have about separate.
But there would still be only 5 to 7 people on those boards.
That has not
That's
been
not
determined.
determined, right? That's what I guess I'm
I
trying to get to that
personally
point.
would say, absolutely not, we've got a minimum of 11.
If I can just clarify, that's exactly what I'm trying to say, that there are ways to make it more fair without overcomplicating it for both the buildings and the staff and the kids and the communities, and still get that representation. And I would agree with you. I think we need to get very hard about that.
And that's, I think, part of the development of the voting boards. Like my current school district does voting at large. It's so much easier to vote at large, but that means the larger town is really having all the voice of the town board.
You
So if
pull
you-
that large voting?
We vote for all board members from all towns. So as someone who lives in Linden, I vote for every board member.
Right, but do you get, is it a hybrid where like, for your town, there is somebody?
Every town has somebody on the board,
That's
but you vote for all of them.
Yeah.
So I don't just vote for the Linden members, I vote for Linden, Concord, and every town does that. And then we commingle the ballots all together before they're run through the machine. But how you decide how many board members, what your voting boards are gonna be, whether it's at large or not, can partially at least talk about the voice, even if it's a school district. It's
And I just, I don't wanna get too deep here because, I suspect this, depending on what we get back from the Senate, this debate may take place then.
What I related to what Representative Quimby is saying is, that's how Oxley works as well.
right.
We have, we have a district, or we have a board member for my town, but we vote on all of them. And we have seen it happen recently, that the town elected a board member and the rest of the towns overwhelmingly chose the other person.
Right.
So that the town did not get the person that they, within their town voted for.
Yeah, that's happening.
Yeah,
So that's your danger with
yeah.
at-large voting.
So that's why we did it differently in ours, where every town, there's only 5 towns in my district. Every town elects their members, but then there's 2 at large
Okay.
that everyone votes on at a different time.
All kinds of
Everyone does
models.
different.
Yeah,
You
and I'm
get-
just saying
you get-
there's
you
ways to
elect
get
your
around
own, but they
this.
get a fraction of a vote.
Yeah, proportional like that. It's just really important that your point is taken.
Yes.
You know, representation can't be lost, voice can't be lost, but we can do it in even model.
Yes.
This is not to your point at all, Representative Parkle, it's more like a, for the fans out there. And, this sort of like urban-rural divide about larger districts, I think we have to drill down. This is why I appreciate having some educational leaders on the map-making subcommittee. Because I do think sometimes certain narratives are also oversimplified. You know, I am in a district of 4,000 that's roughly whatever the ideal size, and if you were to go from one far end of the district to the other far end of the district, it's probably at least 30 miles. So I think that we have to be, we Vermonters, as we think about change, and change is hard, also have to be a little bit more careful in assuming how things are everywhere. And I think that there are other districts like that, and there will be in the future. And it is not just, everything's tight and compact in our population centers. And, we are an urban district by many definitions. But again, 5 towns, at least there, I would be curious to know if you went far in in our district.
Well, not to belabor this, but one last thing I'll add, larger districts, to make it more complicated, larger districts will, in your district and in mine, we don't have one large urban center and a whole bunch of small ones, but in larger districts, we will. So that's why this is really important to figure out how we get representation.
Were you wrapped up right there?
Depends. Do you want to look at the duties of superintendents or principals?
I would say, no.
You have to save something for another day.
Great.
Well, this wasn't scintillating,
But it was
it's actually, there's a lot of stuff we're gonna have to think about.
It'd be interesting to look at those.
So this is just, this is just sort of a start. I mean, it's funny, the annual meeting I've just always accepted as like, this is the way it's done. But then we're thinking like, is it time to modernize this? Mhm.
And there are going to be, depending on the choices you make, related to organizational decisions like meetings and election of officers and that, there's gonna be election law concepts that will bleed into that, so,
Oh, yeah,
it's not all in Title 16.
right.
Perhaps it would be a joint thought exercise in the coming days of, if we were to think as a committee about which parts we can maybe start to walk down the path of understanding more, obviously not gonna make any decisions this year, but to be not starting completely from scratch next January, which parts of this, without knowing exact numbers and boundaries, are sort of gonna be the same hard question either way, and ought to be ones that we start
But I think there are
making
concepts,
our heads hurt about.
there are concepts we can assume. I think larger districts is something we can assume.
Sure.
One of the pieces that you all passed out in age 454 that isn't fleshed out here is that supplemental district spending
Right.
piece.
Yeah.
Right.
How is that
Right.
arrived upon?
Right.
Is it just, are you just switching budget for supplemental district spending, or are there other concepts or processes that go into it? And where do the duties lie?
Or compensation might be a painful but interesting
Absolutely.
one, to just know how much we're spending now. What professional or semi-professional boards around the country look like, where to even start to sort of gain a hold of.
I'd like to know, I'd like to have that defined,
What are-
semi-professional.
Right.
What does that mean,
Right.
right?
And we did not get a definition. from
No,
you.
we didn't, and I would love to know what that definition.
Wage, teacher wages.
All right, we will, stop there, restarting at, 2:40.